Russian retaliation. Moscow's foreign minister announcing the Kremlin is shutting down the United States consulate in St. Petersburg, Russia, and kicking out 150 diplomats, among them 60 Americans. He says this is all in response to the United States and 24 other countries expelling 150 Russian diplomats from their countries after a poisoning of a former Russian spy and his daughter in the United Kingdom. Officials have called it the first chemical weapons attack on European soil since World War II. On Monday, the White House gave 60 Russian diplomats and their families 1 week to get out of the United States and said it plans to close the Russian consulate in Seattle. The Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, accusing officials in London of forcing everybody to follow an anti-Russian course. President Vladimir Putin and officials in Moscow have denied any involvement in that attack. It's Fox Top Story, and Rich Edson's on it live for us at the State Department. Rich?
Shep, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov summoned John Huntsman, the ambassador to Russia, the U.S. ambassador to Russia, to inform him that 60 American diplomats and their families have until April 5th to leave Russia, and that also the United States must clear out all of its staff from the U.S. consulate in St. Petersburg and do so by this Saturday. The breakdown, according to Russian state media, is that 58 employees from the U.S. Embassy in Moscow must leave and 2 who work in the consulate in Yekaterinburg. This is according, of course, to Russia's state media, and we are still waiting on U.S. reaction to all of this, though U.S. officials have been telling us for the last few days that this was anticipated and expected. This is a rule in diplomacy almost. Whatever a country does to your country, you do to their country. And so it was earlier this week the United States kicked out 60 Russian diplomats, or began that process, and then closed the consulate that Russia has in Seattle. Russia says it's also expelling other diplomats, not just Americans, because you remember more than 24 nations say they're kicking out Russian diplomats, all of this in response to that nerve attack in the United Kingdom. As for why Russia chose the U.S. consulate in St. Petersburg, Russian state media says essentially it's because the United States would view it as the most prestigious of its consulates. Could be another reason behind this one, though. When the U.S. announced that it was closing the Russian consulate in Seattle, the embassy here in Washington, D.C. tweeted out a poll asking which U.S. consulate should they close in Russia, and St. Petersburg won that handily, Shep.
We're hearing that the victims, the original victims in all of this, are doing better.
Yeah, out of critical condition, at least the spy's or the ex-spy's daughter is doing so. That's according to the hospital. Also, that she's no longer in critical condition. The British government says they were poisoned with that nerve agent, and now that she's doing better, the Russian government says they want to talk with her. They want to meet with her, perhaps to figure out the Russian government has been denying this whole time that it was a nerve agent and they're responsible for all of this, and they keep demanding evidence as to what the British have on this. But this is simply just part of what the retaliation has gone now. Remember, it was that attack that prompted the UK to kick out Russian diplomats, the US, more than 24 other nations to do so. The Russians now coming full circle on this. Diplomacy at work, Shep.
Rich Edson at State. Rich, thank you.